Let's have some words. Hello, lovely people. Today, I want to talk about an emotion that quietly influences so much of our lives. It's a force that can be both powerful and destructive: shame. Now, I'm not talking about the kind of shame we feel when we mess up, like saying something we regret or making a mistake. That kind of shame, believe it or not, is actually healthy. It's our mind's way of nudging us to do better, to learn from our actions, and to regulate our behavior. But there's another type of shame that's much deeper, and it's harmful. This is the shame that's deliberately planted into us by others whilst we're still young, often by the very people who were supposed to protect us. It's not shame from what we've done, but from what was deliberately and harmfully done to us. Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher, had some interesting thoughts on shame. He said, "Whom do you call bad? Him who always wants to put others to shame. What do you think most humane? To spare a person shame. What is the seal of attained liberty? To be no longer ashamed of oneself." Nietzsche was onto something here. He saw shame as a big part of how we interact with each other. On one side, there's the shame we feel that helps keep us in line, guiding our conscience and behavior. But on the flip side, there's the dark side of shame, when it's used as a weapon, something others use to control or manipulate us. Think about it. The most harmful people in society, those who abuse, harm, or manipulate children, they know exactly how powerful shame is. That's why they use this emotion as a tool for their own advantage. They use shame to shift guilt that belongs to them onto the child. They do this through threats, manipulation, and subtle forms of coercion. They make the child feel responsible for their own actions, so that they themselves can avoid guilt and responsibility for what they have done. They do it by forcing the child to keep secrets, and by making the child feel that their safety lies in the child's hands, and that the safety and well-being of others is also the responsibility of the child. They often dress this up as a special privilege and treat the child as special, as though the ability to manage the responsibility of what's going on is a superpower they have recognized in the child. It's a twisted way to keep themselves safe by making the child carry the burden of their wrongdoing. When this happens, shame becomes more than just an emotion. It becomes deeply personal. It's not just feeling bad about something we did, it's feeling like there's something fundamentally wrong with who we are, because we were somehow meant for this burden. The fact that the shame we carry isn't from our own actions, but from the actions of someone we trusted, makes it all the more pernicious. Picture a child being hurt or manipulated by an adult they look up to. The child knows something isn't right, but the adult, in a cruel twist, makes the child feel like they should accept the situation as normal, and that any abnormality or anguish the child feels is their own fault. The offending adult tells the child, "I'm just a victim here. It isn't my fault. You've got to help, and you've got to carry the burden." It makes the child feel there is something about them that caused the adult to choose them for this role. They can't make sense of it any other way, but in being the chosen one, the deeds of the adult become the child's fault. Of course, the child has no point of reference for any of this. Who can they ask? They must not tell. And so the child starts to believe this twisted view of their role in not just the relationship, but in society. They think, "I'm responsible for this bad thing. If I tell, everyone will see that I am bad. If I tell, it will hurt this adult who is my only friend, because they know I am bad, and they still accept me." If the abuser is a trusted and loved adult in the child's life, which is often the case, the abused child associated the abuse with love, which means they do not stop loving the abuser, they simply stop loving themselves. And once your brain starts thinking in those terms, once you have accepted abuse as an expression of love, once you have stopped liking yourself, let alone loving yourself, how do you ever start to like yourself again? Especially when all of this began in early childhood, before you ever got the chance to develop any self-confidence or self-esteem. The neural pathways laid down in early childhood can cause that person to think in self-deprecating terms for the rest of their lives. When this has happened, learning to actually love yourself and respect yourself becomes a tough call. When this has happened, a person's default position is to always loathe themselves and to accept ill treatment as somehow being their own fault. But what of the people who should be protecting these children and failed to do so? The caregivers, parents, or trusted adults who shared their lives at the time. When these people inflict harm on children in their care, whether through violence, sexual abuse, psychological manipulation, or simple neglect, they twist the child's sense of self. The shame that should belong to these adults is unfairly passed on to the child. And as Nietzsche said, whom do you call bad? Him who always wants to put others to shame. Theirs isn't just a mix-up of who's to blame, it's deep and deliberate betrayal. It's cold and calculated and entirely devoid of love or affection, however they may dress it up. The child, unable to make sense of this unfairness, accepts the shame as their own. Why? Because they are a child. They start to think that because of the shame they are feeling, they themselves must have done something wrong. Nietzsche also said, "Shame is what we feel before those we esteem. It is a reflection of our own inferiority." The fact, therefore, that the child respects and often loves the adult who's hurting them introduces shame from the outset. It's what the child feels, because they esteem the adult. This reinforces the power imbalance. It's a dynamic within which the child is forced to accept the adult's authority and their own lack of agency. In creating this dynamic, these bad adults are setting their children up for a lifetime of grief. The shame inflicted is not simply about making the child feel inferior. It's also a tool these adults use to dodge their own guilt and free themselves of the responsibility of their actions. It's not only cowardice, but is in itself a form of abuse. As I've already said, it's bad and it's evil, just like the adults who perpetrate it. Their selfish desire to abuse and silence children, and inflict shame that they themselves should be feeling, leave scars that can last a lifetime. As that child grows up, the scars run deep. The shame does not just go away. It becomes a part of who they are, shaping their brain and how they see the world. An adult carrying this kind of childhood shame often becomes hyper-responsible, always taking the blame, always trying to avoid the shame that's haunted them for so long. This internalized shame can show up in all kinds of destructive ways. It can lead to a constant feeling of not being good enough, where no matter how successful or accomplished they are, it never feels like enough. They might struggle with feeling worthless, always expecting to fail or be rejected. In relationships, they might have a hard time trusting others, always afraid that their deepest, most shameful secrets will come to light. They might suffer from hidden depression that is masked by an outwardly controlled life, and they might engage in subtle forms of self-harming or self-medicating through illicit substances or alcohol to manage how they feel. What's especially heartbreaking is that this cycle of shame can continue into the next generation. Adults who've been burdened with this kind of shame might, without meaning to, pass it on to their own kids. They can project their unresolved feelings onto their children in adverse ways, such as creating an overprotective and over-controlling environment in which they can keep everyone safe. Yet, in doing so, they are restricting their child's growth and independence, and indirectly passing on the grief and pain and harm of their past. They do not realize that overprotection and control is also harmful. But here's the good news: this cycle can be broken. It starts with recognizing that the shame you carry isn't yours to bear. It belongs to those who wronged you. It was never your fault. Healing from this kind of deep-rooted shame often takes professional help. Therapy can provide a safe space to work through these feelings, to start separating your true self from the shame that was unfairly put on you. Over time, you can begin to rewrite the story you tell yourself, replacing shame with self-compassion and understanding. We also need to change how we interact with children. We need to protect them from this kind of harm, making sure they grow up in environments where they feel valued, loved, and respected, whilst also having the freedom to express themselves and grow. No child should ever have to carry the burden of an adult's shame, and all children should be encouraged to develop a sense of self-confidence in which they know they have the right to speak out and be heard, so that they always have a voice and the confidence to raise any concerns without being judged or shamed. Even if the concerns relate to their parents' overprotection or inherited anxieties, they should be made to feel safe to speak out. In closing, I just want to stress that shame is a powerful emotion that can shape our lives when it's unfairly placed on us during childhood. When people speak of traumatic childhoods, they are often experiencing deep-rooted shame about who they are. It's important to remember that this kind of shame isn't a reflection of who we are. It's a reflection of the failures of those who should have protected us. Only by understanding this can we start to free ourselves from the weight of shame and build a future in which we know we are enough. We can break the cycle. We can heal. Thank you for stopping by today. I am Lovewise Wanda, and you are amazing. Let's have some words. Hello, lovely people. Let's have some words about something interesting that the philosopher Nietzsche once said on the subjects of shame and becoming your authentic self. If someone asked, "What makes a bad person?" Nietzsche would say, "A bad person is someone who tries to make others feel embarrassed or ashamed." Nietzsche believed that the best thing you can do for a person is to never make them feel ashamed. His theory was that if you're truly free, you should never feel ashamed of who you are. Why did he think this? Why did he say, is it important not to feel ashamed? And importantly, why shouldn't we make others feel ashamed of themselves? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. First off, what does it mean to be free? Nietzsche had a really cool way of putting it. He said, you should become who you really are. Imagine you're like a seed of an oak tree. Inside you, there's a big, strong tree just waiting to grow. But if you don't get enough sunlight, water, or the right kind of soil, you might not grow into that awesome oak tree. So being free means having the chance to grow into the best version of yourself. But guess what can stop you from growing into your true self? Shame. Shame is like thinking, who I am is not who I'm supposed to be. When you're ashamed, it's like you're comparing yourself to some idea of who you think you should be and feeling like you don't measure up. But where does that idea come from? It usually comes from other people, like your family, friends, or society. When you were a little kid, you probably didn't worry about what you should do. You just did what felt right to you. But as you grow up, you start to hear all these shoulds from others, and that can make you feel like you're not good enough. When you try to be what others want you to be, you stop being yourself. It's like you're just pretending, and that's why Nietzsche thought shame was so bad. If you're ashamed, you might end up creating a fake version of yourself just to fit in. And that's sad, because then you're not living as your true self. Let's talk about a boy named Joe. Joe loved art, music, and was really sensitive to other people's feelings. But his mum kept comparing him to his brother, who was more into sports and being tough. She told Joe he should be more like his brother and teased him for being different. So, Joe started pretending to be someone he wasn't. He gave up painting and started acting like a tough guy, but deep down he wasn't happy. He felt lonely because nobody knew the real him. One day, Joe realized that trying to be someone else wasn't making him happy. He saw that his relationships with people like his mum weren't real because they didn't even know who he truly was. So, Joe decided to stop pretending. He found friends who liked him just the way he was, and he went back to being an artist. Finally, he felt alive and happy again because he was being his true self. So, why is shame bad? Because it stops you from being who you really are. But remember, I'm talking about the kind of shame that makes you think you're not good enough. There might be other kinds of shame, but that's a story for another time. And hey, if you liked hearing about these ideas, maybe check out more about Nietzsche. If you read up on him, you'll realize he had some interesting thoughts about trusting yourself and being your own person. Thanks for stopping by today and listening.
Lots of love from me, Wanda. I'm so glad you made it here today. Please give me another visit sometime soon. Please like and subscribe. Please let me know if there's any topic you would like me to cover. I'm always here for you.
Heal your heart, rise and prosper. In your strength you will find yourself and peace of mind.